our understanding of the church history changed a lot in those last 20 years, maybe 50 years. About 70 years ago, the common knowledge about church history, the common accepted view, was very, very different and very incompatible to what we believe today. Back then, the accepted narrative really was that the church flowed very directly out of the teachings of Jesus. Like there was Jesus, he taught Peter, Peter founded the church in Rome, and everything happened very, very natural along those lines. Like Paul did all the missionary work, and things came together in Rome, and the whole thing was done by the end of the first century. And then we have the second century where the heretics start to show up, and the church does a wonderful job in fighting heresy and in staying true to the right path up until Constantine in the beginning of the fourth century, when the Roman Empire finally, by God's divine will, picks up the Christian faith and makes it to their official religion, and moves Europe into the glorious medieval period. That is a complete lie. And the current research and the many, many voices that speak up attest to the fact that the New Testament, the central document of the church in the early years, wasn't written until the second half of the second century. And now that's crucial. It's not about canonization, which happened way later. It's about the writing of those documents and the assembling of the particular faith, of the particular content of those documents happened in the second part of the second century. And we have Irenaeus to tell us about the result of that process. And so we don't have a church, a Catholic church, prior to the second half of the second century. The Catholic Church didn't have anything to be Catholic about before. In fact, the very name Catholic, meaning unified, doesn't apply to, doesn't make sense if it's a linear growth out of Jesus' teaching. It only makes sense if there are many different churches and denominations to unify in the first place, which is very much the case in the second part of the second century in Rome. So we are forced to see the creation of the Catholic Church as a major political effort, again, in the second half of the second century and the third century, and continuing from there, and not at all a natural outflow and an undisturbed growth of the faith as such. It's very much a political power, some political resources involved in the process. There's compromises involved in the process. We see a lot of teachers moving from Alexandria to Rome prior to the establishing of the Catholic faith. We can only assume that this is part of the process, part of the centralization that was being done specifically to create a unified version of what tended to grow in all kinds of directions beforehand. And we have voices that attest to these different churches. We know of Marcion and his situation as one of the church leaders in Rome, and so there are many others. And so there's There's a lot of competition and a lot of different lines of thinking. And indeed, we find the New Testament with its four Gospels as speaking to these compromises that had to be made to include all kinds of different um, tendencies inside of Christianity into one unified umbrella by allowing these different documents to stand independently next to each other. All the while, and that's Irenaeus speaking, a lot of other Christian traditions were strictly forbidden and cut out and told to be heresies. And we are left wondering why such a process had been attempted and who did it and to what purpose. And to see that more clearly now, we have to take a step back, which church history doesn't normally do, because normally church history assumes to be kind of a self-growing story with a church that is fighting against the political establishment until it overcomes the establishment and gets to be the foremost religion in the Roman Empire. But now, with the new understanding, we have to ask the question, who's pushing the unification process forward, which is not at all natural, and who gains from it? What's the purpose of it all? And to see that, we have to take a look at the situation of the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd century. And here we see Rome being in a deathly struggle with Jerusalem. Now, the way this is usually being told is that there are like distinct episodes of a struggle. We have Rome burning with Nero. We have the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. We have the slaughter of Jews in Alexandria. And we have finally the total annihilation of Jewish people in Galilee and Jerusalem. So the final victory of Rome and the exilation of the remaining Jews to Babylon. It's prudent to see all these different events as part of an epic struggle between two empires. And we get a glimpse of that in the Gospels and in Jesus' in Jesus' conflict with being a Jewish Messiah, and that's what the Gospel of Mark tells us, that Jesus rejects the name of a Messiah, precisely because the Jewish Messiah isn't anything like Jesus. It's, to the contrary, a warring leader, a king, that with the backing of the gods, or God in the Jewish case, smashes all the enemies and takes world domination as the prize. And the Jews in the Second Temple period are, in their own perspective, the elected people, the selected people that get to be the world leaders in the end. So this is a very militant struggle embedded in the religious structure here. And that's what Rome always fought against, and what Rome found really, really hard to overcome. And when the Jewish people were finally subdued and Rome finally had peace on that front, Rome looked for the reason why this struggle was that hard, and found that Jewish people and the Jewish military efforts for that matter relied heavily on their spiritual um, substance, on their belief in Yahweh and the Old Testament. And Rome was very much tempted to recreate a similar system for themselves. And that's very much the motivation to patch up the Christian faith and prepend the Jewish scriptures to it, make the whole thing compatible, and make the whole thing into a Roman state religion. Now that's motive. We also have to look at Julius Caesar, which happened like half a century before Jesus' time. Jesus was assassinated, killed by his contemporaries. Basically, those senators sacrificed themselves knowingly by killing by killing Caesar. Because Caesar was unstoppable at the point. He was about to enter with his legions, enter the Orient, and become an Oriental king. And this very Senate meeting was about the question how the kingship of Caesar meshes with the Roman Republic. And the simple answer was it didn't. And the senators were very much afraid that Caesar would become king, anointed by gods. And in this case, the Greek pantheon, or what the Romans appropriated and called Jupiter, and had their own version of it, but essentially the same gods that the Greek people spoke about. So Caesar is known to refer to those gods and to be very prone to take on the king role. And Brutus looked at it the same way and said, no, that's not going to happen. Rome needs to be a republic, and he sacrificed himself, as I said. Now, it's curious to see that in the end, Caesar got his wish, insofar as a couple of centuries later, the Roman Republic was a kingship. The kings in the Roman realm were put in by God, referred to God. Now, God did get it exchanged along the way. So something happened, and this something is Jesus. This something is this spiritual divine intervention that is the Christ. And it's easy to see that without the Christ, the Roman Empire would have been another run at Babylon. It would have been essentially the same at the Babylonian Empire before. And it's very interesting. And it means that to talk about church history is totally related to, needs to be seen in the context of Roman history very much. And it also means that the creation of the Catholic Church was such a political act that there was a lot of motivation for fraud, a lot of motivation for telling untruths, telling history that doesn't really make sense to us today, like fraudulent history, invent saints along the way, invent writings, condemn heresies that actually have as much claim to go back to sources as anything else. Burn writings that didn't fit the new narrative, and so on and so forth. The other question is, if we look at the history this way, is how did the missionary work happen? Now, if we have the church coming into existence so late, like second half of the second century, third century, and so on and so forth, we see so many Christians without a church, without a Roman Catholic church. We see them in Asia Minor, we see them in the Frankish domain, and like the Germans and the Franks, and we go to the British Islands and see Christians over there. We have Alexandria in the northern Africa halves, and we don't even speak about Asia. So how did those Christians come about? And could it be that those Christians were in the later centuries being recognized as heretics, one tribe after the other, simply because their missionaries were heretics in the eyes of later Catholic thought? There's a lot to explain here, and I believe such an wider theory is badly needed.